If you're starting out on Amazon, I think there are 5 categories you should avoid as a beginner, and I'm going to tell you what those are in this video. I'm Richard with Seller Helper, verified Amazon advertising consultant, and over the past 8 years, I have advertised on thousands of products across just about every category you can conceive of. And so I have seen what categories I think are really tough to work with, especially as a beginner when you might not have a lot of capital and you might not have a lot of branding or marketing experience. But before we get in the video, I'm gonna run the ad for the BidBuddy in case you don't know what that is. Here it is. If you don't know already, you can use Amazon's bulk operations to download all of your campaign data for all your active campaigns. Here I have all the data from these campaigns, and what I want to do is I want to change the bids. I want to optimize. And what this tool does, it's called the BidBuddy. You click on BidBuddy and you get this. All you have to do is click one of the boxes, enter the amount you want to change, click OK. Easy as that. Then you save your file, you come back to Amazon, choose your file, upload, and it's done. So that's the BidBuddy. If you want it, there will be a link in the description where you can go get it for free. Now onto the video. First things first, who is this for? Well, this is for beginners, like I said. So if you're starting out on Amazon, you don't have a brand, you want to get into Amazon, this is kind of who this video is for. If you are an established brand off of Amazon, then kind of disregard these categories, especially if you are established in these categories. Of course, there's no problem jumping onto Amazon in this category. This is really for somebody starting out, trying to decide what kind of product to get into. The very first category I would recommend avoiding is supplements. Supplements are so saturated that it really is a pain. There are a lot of good things about supplements. Some of the pros of supplements are high margin. Generally speaking, you can get most products, especially like capsules, at a very low cost, and the markup on those things is like 400%, 500%, sometimes even more than that, especially if you can purchase at volume. So they are a pretty good product from a margin perspective. Obviously, they have subscriptions, or they are a product kind of designed around the subscription model. So you build up a subscriber base, and then you have this kind of continuing monthly recurring revenue that is great. And they have low return rates. Some products have no returns. A lot of supplements actually have no returns allowed. So you get that added benefit of having a product on Amazon that you don't have to deal with all the returns. But there's some cons. First of all, advertising on supplements is crazy expensive. So let's just give you an example. If you have a product that's $25, it will cost you, no joke, $3, $4 a click just to get some traffic on that product. It doesn't really matter what it is until you start getting some momentum and Amazon starts, giving you some better algorithmic help, let's say. It is going to be really expensive to advertise almost every supplement I've come across. So that is a big issue, especially starting out. High competition is the next one. Obviously, it's a very saturated market. There are tons of supplements. So it's going to be even harder for you to establish a brand. If you have branding outside of Amazon and you attach supplements to that branding and then launch them on Amazon, that's a totally different thing than just, I'm going to start a supplement company on Amazon from scratch. That is really going to be a tough go. In addition to that, it's really tough to get certain types of supplements moving. There are a lot of established brands, and they are pretty big, and there's a lot of volume, and they scoop it up because they have more money to out advertise you. So getting yourself into that market is going to be a challenge just because of not just the competition, but also the size of that competition. And then finally, there's regulatory issues. Regulatory meaning policy, like Amazon's policy for products. You cannot sell certain chemicals, certain additives in products on Amazon. They don't allow it. And if you're not aware of what those are and you spend all this money getting product and then you send it to Amazon and they kick it off Amazon because you have something in your product that you're not allowed to have, you can't get it back on Amazon. You have to remove that chemical, then relaunch. You probably have to get new labeling. It's a real pain in the neck. Plus, some chemicals that Amazon allows have to have certifications that you then need to provide to Amazon, and they need to be updated if Amazon asks for them again. So there's a lot of issues with running supplements because Amazon has a lot of rules surrounding what supplements are allowed. The second category I would avoid is apparel, and this is everything like clothing There's too much clothing on Amazon, so don't even try to start a brand on Amazon. Bags, this is like backpacks and packing cubes and things like that. And shoes, that's another one. If you're trying to launch one of these kinds of brands on Amazon, you're going to have a real uphill battle, especially as a beginner. But some of the pros are they can have good margins. So a lot of times apparel is not very expensive to buy per unit, so you can get pretty good margins, especially if you want to try something in the more like high-end, not quite luxury, but higher end apparel items. They have lower fees. Now Amazon provides lower fees for apparel products, but that's because of one of the main cons, which we'll get to. They're simple to advertise. The advertising for apparel is like really easy. Basically, auto campaigns. You really don't have to get that complicated. Defensive campaigns, category targeting. It can be pretty simple and pretty cheap to do advertising for apparel. But cons. There's a lot of apparel competition. Like I said, there's too much apparel on Amazon. You will get lost in the crowd really, really easily. There is just a lot of clothes available on Amazon. It's probably one of the biggest categories. Really high return rates because people buy things, try them on, don't like them, send them back to you. You can't resell it because it's been taken out of the packaging. Or people buy multiple sizes, find the one that fits, then send the others back. So there's a lot of churn or a lot of returns on apparel products. Another big con is that you have to have tons of SKUs. So if you have a shirt, right, just a t-shirt, you need to have all the sizes from extra small to extra, extra large, right? So you've got a lot of SKUs you got to manage for one product and have inventory. So your inventory cost is kind of high because you have to have all of these SKUs. And another one that doesn't get talked about much is what I call rogue sellers. So if you're an apparel brand that has your clothing manufactured in China or Vietnam or wherever you get it made, something that happens really, really frequently. Like this category is the category I have seen the most rogue sellers in of any category. And what a rogue seller is someone that is not you cannibalizing your listing and selling your product. And a lot of times it is the manufacturer, it's the supplier that you have a deal with to make the stuff. They sell it to somebody else, and that seller then sells under your brand. And when you get them taken down by Amazon, they just create a new seller account and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. It is really difficult to deal with, and I see it in apparel categories like bags, shoes, clothing especially. I see it there all of the time. It is a huge pain in the neck. And as a beginner, you really don't want to have to deal with that. You just don't have to. And so you might as well avoid it. Don't sell apparel. Next is electronics. Now, this could be a lot of different types of things. But broadly speaking, electronics are something I would try to avoid. It could be air purifiers. It could be cameras. It could be computers or monitors. You name it. Electronics are something that I try to avoid, but electronics obviously have some pros. Number one is they can be a very high ticket item, and that's a good thing because even though you might have a low margin, you can charge a lot of money, so the dollar amount of that margin is pretty good, and so you can be pretty profitable from a dollars perspective. But there are a lot of cons. It's highly competitive. And by competitive, we're talking advertising and other people, because where are a lot of these electronics made? They're made overseas. You're probably not the manufacturer. And so you can't control the cost, and they will just duplicate, rebrand, and sell under you, or you will be selling almost a complete duplicate of another product that's on Amazon. So it's really competitive in that sense. And that gets us into tight margins. So these can tend to cost quite a bit per unit, unless you can buy bulk, in which case you have to have a lot of capital to do that. So your cost of goods can be pretty high on this, and storage costs. Depending on the type of electronic it is, your packaging is probably pretty big. You might end up in the large, bulky category. So you're going to be paying a lot for storage fees while trying to get this brand up and running. So that's kind of a headache as well. Again, expensive advertising. Certain electronics categories have enormous cost per clicks. We're talking $5, $8 cost per clicks on average. You've got to be pretty careful with that type of advertising, and you got to have a lot of budget for that type of advertising. So it's really high barrier to entry to do that. And then inventory costs, again, same thing as cost of goods. It is just expensive for a lot of electronics or a lot of types of electronics. You probably aren't the manufacturer, so you don't have a lot of control over the cost. So you're purchasing this electronic from overseas that is way more expensive than what they can sell it for on Amazon. It's just not a good thing to get into at the beginning. Number 4 is toys. Primarily people, but also pet toys. There are some good things about selling toys. The primary good thing is that it is great during the holidays. Toys sell a lot during the holidays. Now, they sell a lot during other parts of the year as well, but primarily this is a seasonal product. This is holiday season, which leads into the cons. First of all, they tend to be pretty low margin because people don't want to pay a lot for toys, and so you can't charge a lot for toys. And that's a problem because one of your biggest levers on how much money you can make is how much can you charge. And if you have the same toy as somebody else and you're trying to charge double for that, good luck, because people don't want to pay a lot for toys. Next is seasonal demand. Like I said, toys tend to be high demand during Q4, so like Christmas, right? And then they don't sell nearly as well during the rest of the year. So you have to be prepared for that type of a business model in purchasing inventory and then managing expenses throughout the rest of the year. And then this is a problem that if you followed any of the Amazon space, there's a guy, Molson Hart, who sells toys on Amazon. He talks about this a lot. The toy market is actually a declining market. And so it's not that wise to actually start into a declining market. And what I mean by declining market is fewer and fewer toys are being sold every year because more and more kids don't play with toys. They use their iPads and use electronics and play video games, right? So there is less and less demand for toys. And so you don't want to start into a business that is declining. Finally, it's really high competition. I mean, there are tons of toys, tons of different types of toys. It's very competitive. And so you are entering not only a declining market, but also a very competitive market, which is really not putting your best foot forward if you are starting out. And then finally, cosmetics. This is stuff like makeup, lotions, and I even put soaps into this category. Soaps can be a good business if you are off Amazon already doing pretty well. You see a lot of like goat milk products. Those products, if you have a brand that you sell at like farmers markets, it does pretty well, and you want to send it to Amazon and also try to sell there and build that brand that way, you can do that. But starting out, it's a pretty tough gig, and I don't recommend soaps, but there are a lot of pros to cosmetics. Number 1 is high margin. So just like supplements, creating these products is pretty cost effective, usually pretty inexpensive. Even purchasing from another company that does the manufacturing is usually not very expensive, and you can charge a lot of money for this stuff for small quantities too. Like there's lipsticks out there that are $100 a stick, like there is a lot of potential for profit in this category. And it falls into this subset of products that tend to have recurring purchases, right? If somebody uses your face mask, when they run out, they will probably buy it again. And so you have high margin, high ticket, recurring purchases, all these really, really good things that seem to make sense to start out with as a product, but then it leads us into cons. Because these products can do well and there is a lot of money to be made there, the advertising can be incredibly expensive, which eats into your margin, especially starting out. There is a lot of competition. There are tons of cosmetic brands. There are probably as many cosmetic brands as there are supplement brands for the exact same reason. High margin, you can charge a lot of money in terms of pricing, so you can buy it low and sell it high, so you have good margin, but also the dollar amount of your margin is high, and that's great, but that means everybody is going to try to do it, and so there's tons of competition. And just like supplements, there are some regulatory challenges that you have to face for the exact same reason. Chemicals that are inside these products have to be allowed on Amazon, and if they are not, you will get kicked off of Amazon. You have to then reformulate and relabel your product to get it back on Amazon. Plus, you have to make sure you have the updated documentation if it's required. And then something that isn't talked about a lot is the dominance of big established brands. So companies that are already established outside of Amazon, also selling on Amazon to gain that market share. It's going to be tough to beat those competitors out. Now, a lot of times people are okay and open to trying out different and niche brands for cosmetics. That's sort of the allure of some cosmetics, is that people like to try the niche stuff because it's not the big established brand. But let's face it, the reason the big established brands do well is because they're big and established and can charge basically nothing, still make great margins, and sell tons of volume. So it's going to be pretty competitive because of the dominance of big brands. And then there's a few honorable mentions for categories that I would try to avoid at the outset, but there is good reason to maybe get into it and look at it as an option. The first one is pets. Obviously, we've already talked about supplements for pets and toys for pets, which are broadly categories that I would tend to avoid, but there are a lot of opportunities for pet products. It's a growing market. The products can be very expensive because people spend a lot of money on their pets, and there's still a lot of opportunity in the pets category. Another thing that I really like about pets as a category is that a lot of times pet products are made in the US, just like a lot of supplements are made in the US. And the reason I like that is because it makes logistics a lot easier than trying to get some of this stuff overseas. Next is candles. This is kind of a really niche category, but I have advertised so many candles, and people starting candle brands. Don't start a candle brand. It's expensive to advertise. You can charge a lot of money for these sometimes if you can really get the branding right and be sort of a luxury candle. But I think candles perform better as an add-on to an existing brand. So if you have other decor or products where candles is a good add-on product, that makes sense to maybe add candles, but starting out, candles is pretty tough. And then lastly, furniture. I don't see a lot of people trying to start furniture brands, but they are good in that they can be very high ticket with pretty good margins potentially. The big downside is logistics. If you're going to store it at Amazon, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And if you're going to ship it yourself, it's going to cost you a lot of money. And you got to store it somewhere. So like there is a lot of logistics issues with furniture that as a beginner, you might just want to avoid. And finally, there's a couple of categories where I think it would be wise to consider starting, especially moving forward into 2025. The first one is sports equipment, especially obscure sports. Now, everybody started a pickleball paddle brand like a year ago, so maybe avoid that one. But there's a lot of sports where there are not a lot of products and really well-established brands on Amazon. An example would be cycling. That is a kind of a niche sport. People spend a lot of money because the people that are in cycling tend to have money because bikes cost a lot. Another example would be something like disc golf. People are very passionate and like to play disc golf, and so they tend to buy a lot of disc golf stuff. It's very niche. Then this second one to try is not necessarily a category in and of itself. It's more of an idea, but it's hobby accessories. Examples would be like winemaking, knitting, hunting, things like that. The reason I say hobby accessories, because you're not necessarily going to start a hunting rifle company, right? But hunting rifles have a lot of accessory products that are necessary, like cleaning kits and bags and Picatinny rails and straps and things like that. So there's a lot of accessories for hobbies that you could start a brand around that hobby by starting with some of these accessory products as opposed to the main product. So what are some of the pros about these two categories, broadly speaking? Number one is there's less competition. With sports equipment and hobby accessories, there are going to be fewer competitors in those categories. One, because they're less known. Now, they don't have as much volume, like purchase volume, but it's easier to get into. Flexibility with pricing. This means that you can charge more because there are fewer people charging anything. So you can start at a more premium price because people tend to be more passionate about these types of categories, and so you can start out at a higher price. Again, it's easy to build a brand around these types of niches because they are niches. They're not big, broad categories like supplements or cosmetics. It's cycling and wrestling and winemaking and knitting, right? These are very small categories that you can establish yourself better because it's a smaller market. And finally, there's a lot of variety in the products you can have. And something that is really helpful on Amazon is having a number of SKUs, especially if they all have the same branding. You can provide a lot of products to this niche that complement each other, because if somebody buys one thing, they will then need another thing. The example would be if somebody buys a disc for disc golf, well, they probably need a bag to carry those discs in, and they might need something to retrieve those discs, and they might need something to clean those discs if they get them in the mud or something like that. So there's a lot of variety of products that you can add to the brand that make it more viable in these niches. So key takeaways: focus on brand building and try to charge as much as you possibly can. It's easier to do that in niches with less competition than if you have to compete with all the big sellers that can charge any price. Avoid overly competitive categories because they are overly competitive. And as a beginner, you might not have the capital needed to be competitive. And you might not be able to take the kind of capital risk that is needed to be competitive. Meaning you might not be able to aggressively advertise and lose money at the beginning to get your name out there, to get your product selling, to get the kind of volume that you need to be a contender. And then you want to look for categories where you have a lot of variety in how you can establish yourself. Becoming a brand in these niches doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sell the product in that niche. You can sell a lot of accessory products for that niche and establish a brand that way, then get into selling the primary product in that niche. So I hope that was helpful. If it was, please leave a like and subscribe. And as always, if you need any help with Amazon, there's a link in the description where you can reach out to me directly. I'll see you in the next one.